In this presentation, brought to you by The Russell Brown Show, I'm going to be demonstrating how to combine multiple nighttime exposures together with a great script called Dr. Brown's Stack-O-Matic. Now in this presentation, I'm working with some fantastic images that I've borrowed from a great photographer by the name of Scott Martin. Now Scott is an expert at night photography. And as you can see from these images, he's going out, in this case, into the ghost town of Bodie and setting up his camera and taking a series of images throughout the evening. He's loaned these images to me so that I can interpret them in their Camera Raw format and combine them all together to go from the standard image you see here to this final result. Now I'm going to combine these standard images you see here, but Scott has also used a flashlight to light one of the exposures that you see here. So I'm going to combine this lit exposure with these standard exposures so that I can have the moving stars as well as some highlights that I can bring in from the night painting with the flashlight. Okay, let's get going. Now my project is going to start in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to select all of my images in the sequence of images I have here from Scott Martin. Here in Adobe Bridge, I'm selecting the first image, then selecting my Shift key and selecting my last image in the series. I'm going to scroll to the left and make sure I have all of my images. In fact, I do not. I need to add this one final exposure right here. Now, I'm going to go right into Adobe Camera Raw. That's Command R on the Macintosh or Control R on the PC. Because this is where my story begins. Because I want to interpret these images and apply different qualities to these images here in Adobe Camera Raw. One of the first things I did with these images is I clicked on this icon right here for lens correction. I wanted to go in and add a little bit of lens correction. So I'm selecting the Profile tab here and selecting Enable Lens Profile Correction. Notice that the lens that Scott used is selected down here. It's a 24mm lens. That was automatic. The first thing I did was right down here, I made a correction to the vignetting. I actually like a nice dark edge, so I'm moving the vignetting all the way over to 0. Next, I want to point out that I adjusted the chromatic aberration right here. I find that in projects like this, eliminating as much of the chromatic aberration as possible is really, really helpful. So I've actually increased this value to 138 right here. Next, I'm going to go over to this icon for HSL grayscale adjustments. I want to show you a few things I've done here. As you can see here under the Saturation tab, I've gone in and adjusted the saturation values for the individual colors within my image. The one in particular to take note of is the actual night sky. If I leave the night sky at its full saturation, it's a little bit too blue. I still like a little bit of blue in my sky, so I'm going to adjust that just like this. When I work on a project like this, I tend to select all my images up here in the upper left. Select all, so that if I do make an adjustment to the blue slider, it then adjusts all of the images to that same value. Next, let's go over here to sharpening right here. Now, since these photographs were taken at night and they're long exposures, they can tend to have a bit of noise in them. So I'm adjusting my noise reduction here and also down here some color noise reduction as well. Just something else I want to point out. Finally, let's go to this tab right here, the Basic tab. Because here, I'm going to increase my clarity, as you see here, because I find it really makes the stars pop out of the sky. I really want to have a nice bright star for that sweeping pattern of the streaking stars, and bringing my clarity up really helps. Notice that my vibrance is up here as well, and I've made a little bit of adjustment to the brightness. The normal photograph may look like this, but it was a little too bright for me. I'm dropping it down because I want to bring back in the lightness and the detail to the machinery here and not to the background or the sky. I want to really focus my attention on the stars moving and on the detail found in the machinery. So I'm adjusting the brightness down a bit. Okay, once I'm done with all of these adjustments, I would select Done. Okay, back here in Bridge, it's now time to select our images and use my Dr. Brown's Stack-O-Matic to bring all of the images together into one Photoshop file. Of course, before I started this project, I installed Dr. Brown's services here on my version of Photoshop CS5. I know that it's installed because I go to the Tools menu and down here to Dr. Brown's services. And of course, you can download this from my website or from the CD from which you may be watching this tutorial. Once it's installed, you go to the Tools menu, down to Dr. Brown's services, and over to Dr. Brown's Stack-O-Matic right here. I'm going to select it. It's going to, of course, use the images which I currently have selected in Adobe Bridge. Now, there are two ways you can use the Stack-O-Matic script. You can stack items into what's called a smart object, or you can stack them as normal layers and apply a blend mode. Now, the two techniques are different. If you select the smart object approach here, it will then bundle all of your images together into a smart object, and you can set the stack mode down here. The stack modes that you can select are listed here in the scrolling menu. The key one to keep in mind for nighttime photography, of course, is the maximum setting right here. It will give you the maximum pixel value across all of your images, and that is the one you would select. I would also recommend that you select Auto Align, even though you may have photographed these with a tripod, which is almost mandatory. You still may want to remove some of the shake from the wind or even kicking the tripod like I've done. And as I've been told by my expert friends, forcing 16-bit per channel is definitely recommended. This is how you would do it with this process. Now, the second technique is something that was brought to my attention by Scott Martin himself, and that's where we'll create layers. This technique allows me to then create the layer and a layer mask for each of the layers so I can blend and paint the different exposures together. I really like this variation on this theme. So in this project, I'm going to select to create layers. And the blend mode that we need to choose for a starry, starry night like this one is lighten. We want to choose the lightest value from each of the exposures. This way, we'll have a streaking star pattern. Select lighten. We want to auto align, and in this case, I want to add a layer mask to each of the layers, and the mask reveals the layer. Next, I click OK. It will then open up each of my Camera Raw images and use and interpret the image based upon the settings that I set up earlier in Adobe Camera Raw. It will then layer these one by one into a single document and add that layer mask for me. And on top of that, it will auto align them. Let's let this start the process. Okay, it has completed the processing of all my images. As you can see over here to the right, they're all displayed. Let's go ahead and hide the Adobe Bridge application right now. And then let's bring up the image size here on the left so we can see what's happening. Check it out. You can see the streaking stars in the background in this image. But you can also see that this one image, the image that has been lit with a flashlight, is overpowering the image and is a little bit too bright. Let's drop this down one more size, just like that. That's perfect. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off for a moment so we can see this. That's much better, because I want to go in next and show you how I can paint in the light into this image. To begin with, I'm going to move this layer that has been lit with the flashlight all the way to my topmost layer. Turn it back on again, click on the layer, and then let's drag it all the way here to the top, and then drop it. Now I'm going to select the layer mask, which was automatically applied to this using Dr. Brown's Stack-O-Matic, and I'm going to fill this with black. My current foreground color is black, as you see here to the left. So I'm going to do an Option key or Alt key and the Delete key, and it will flood that with black. Then let's go over and select a brush tool. Here I'm selecting the brush. I'm going here into the Options bar, and I'm seeing that I have a really soft brush, a 0%. That's correct. And let's bring up the size of my brush a bit, just like that. Now what I can do is go in and paint into my image. But I don't want to paint with black, I want to paint with white. So I'm going to select the X key on my keyboard, and that will toggle my foreground and background colors. So I now am painting with white. You'll also notice that I'm painting with a 10% white. That's a little bit too light. I'm going to select the number 2 key on my keyboard, which changes that to 20%. Now check this out. I can go in here and start to paint with light, similar to the way that Scott painted the light on with his flashlight. But this lets me target the flashlight just where I want it. Check out this really nice glow here underneath this machinery on the right. I can bring that out with this painting with light technique. And let's add a little bit of light over here on the left. I really want to bring out the details here on this furnace here on the left. I can really start to bring those out, and as I click each time, I'm letting a little bit more come through in this process. I also liked the color here in this grass or weeds around this machinery. It was a really nice touch, and I just want to go in and just bring a little bit of that color out in this process. I'm going to go in here because I want to have a really nice strong point of interest here on this machinery on the right, and I also want another point of interest over here on the left, and that's this lettering right here. Let's really bring that out as I zoom in and look at this. Oh, there's some nice light here on the side as well. That looks great. Let's drop back out again and see the entire scene. Next, I want to add a little bit of shading to the foreground. There's too much detail here in the foreground. I want to kill this detail and let our eye focus here on the machinery and the sky. To do that, I'm going to go right up here to this topmost image, this image that we're using for the highlights. Then, going down here to the base of my Layers tabbed panel, I'm going to click on this icon right down here to create a new fill or adjustment layer. And in this case, I want to create a levels adjustment layer. What I want to do is darken the foreground. I'm going to select my midpoint here and start to darken it, just like this. That looks great. However, I'm darkening the entire image, and I only want to darken the foreground. So once again, I'm going to target the layer mask, which is attached automatically to this adjustment layer, and I'm going to fill it with black. In this case, my background color is black, so I'm going to select my Command key or my Control key and the Delete key, and it will fill that layer with black. Once again, with the white brush set to 20%, let's go in and paint in that shadowing or dark values to my foreground. I'm going to bring the brush size up with my close bracket on my keyboard. Check it out. I can start to paint in this shading. As I continue to paint this in, I can really start to drop down some of the values of the areas around the image. Let's pull back a little bit so we can see the entire image. I'm even going in and dropping down some of the values here near the horizon, because now look how I can really get that spotlight around on the machinery here on the right and this stove or furnace here on the left. I'm really focusing my attention there because I can kill this foreground lightness with this technique. I'm also going to bring my brush size up, and believe it or not, I'm going to take one little sweep through the sky because I really love to give a nice dark sky right there at the top, so it emphasizes my horizon and that nice bright blue along the horizon. Wow, this is looking great. But of course, there's more. Let's bring it up in size because I want to add my final little detail. Now there's a special technique I use that I borrowed from another photographer by the name of Calvin Hollywood, and I put it into an action. If I open up my Actions tabbed panel right here, you can see that I have Russell Brown's detailing actions right here. Now, of course, you can find Russell Brown's detailing actions on the website in close proximity to this movie you are watching now, or on the CD from which you may be watching the movie as well. It's called Russell Brown's Detailing Actions. You can then load it into your version of Photoshop and you can use it as well. So here it is, Smart Object Detailing from Calvin Hollywood. Before I run this processing, I need to capture a snapshot of all of my layers at this moment. To do that, I'm going to use a great keyboard shortcut. It's the Option, Command, and Shift key on the Macintosh, or the Control, Alt, Shift key on the PC, and the letter E on your keyboard. This will then give you a snapshot image here right at the top. This snapshot image is a compressed version of all of your layers together in one image. With this top layer selected, I can now run this Calvin Hollywood Smart Object Detail action. Down here at the base, I'm going to select play. Check it out. Let's close this menu down. You can see that I have a detail layer right here. If I turn the visibility off and on again, you can see the snap of sharpening and detail that it brings to the image. It's really, really interesting. Now, I don't want to have this technique covering the entire image. I don't want it sharpening everything. That looks really odd. So once again, I'm going to use a layer mask. In this case, I'm going to hold down the Option key or Alt key, targeting this detail layer, and then I'm going to click on the Add Layer Mask icon at the base, right down here. If I hold down the Option or Alt key, it automatically masks out this layer by filling the mask with black, as you can see here. All I do now is go in and paint in the detail, similar to the way I painted in the light. I need to paint with white. I need to paint with a light brush, like a 20% brush. And let's bring the brush size down, and let's go in for a close-up and start to paint in this detail. Again, let's bring the brush size down, and then let's paint in detail. I'm painting with white on this surface, and it should start to now bring out some of the detail. I'm going to go ahead and select the number 5 key on my keyboard because I wasn't seeing the detail popping out as quickly as I wanted it to. Wow, that's nice. Let's go over here to the furnace. Now watch as I paint in the detail over the letters. I can really get those letter forms to pop, and let's bring out some of the detail here. Cool. So as I paint over the image, I can add a really nice metallic detail to the surface of these old rusted items here sitting in Bodie. Let's zoom back out and see what our image looks like. Okay, that looks great. There you go. It's the Russell Brown interpretation of some Scott Martin photographs here from the ghost town of Bodie. Give this technique a try and you'll find all the elements you need to do the same technique on my website. Give it a try.